Hello, everybody. Welcome back to More People, More Problems with myself, Chels, and the lovely Brit. You look like a picture straight out of Stranger Things, that TV show. It's like the vibe that your shirt is giving to me right now, and I'm loving it.
It's because for anyone listening and not watching the video, I'm wearing a very 80s inspired beige,
True.
brown, yellow knit shirt.
It's super cute. But that's really giving me Stranger Things vibes, and my daughter would love it. Um, Okay, so let's hop into the episode here before we jump into the actual topic. A couple of reminders: not sharing personal information about other people's shit. It'll be just ours. We'll talk about you later when we're not on camera, obviously. So the usual. The opinions expressed during this episode are of our own, and they're not of our current or former employees. I think that's important to mention, and also for everyone out there who's listening and enjoying our podcast and our content, please like and subscribe. It helps us to know if we're hitting on our audience. You're welcome to drop a comment on topics you might want to see or something that
I love
might have
that.
resonated. Yeah, something I what I've been getting is I've been enjoying comments received on various episodes when certain things are really resonating with people because it helps us to tailor
Yeah.
our approach or how we're going to deliver various topics like going forward. So I think that's amazing feedback. So yeah, all those things, like, subscribe, the little heart situation. Oh, you're so cute. Anywho, let's just jump into the topic. Britt, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So today we are going to jump into the term really dubbed in the past 2 years, quiet quitting. What is it? What does it mean? How has it shown up as, a sweeping nation of employees quiet quitting, as they say? I mean, all the headlines are like, do you know your employees are quiet quitting? What do you do?
Ugh,
Like, let's
gross.
demystify it a bit and get into it. So, I guess my first thought, strong opinion, let's kick it off with one. I think quiet quitting just means that you are sticking around in a role that you're not engaged in. You don't want to quit because you probably need the money, but you're not really leveling up or extra computing. You're probably doing the bare minimum of work. And I just think it's lack of engagement. And I think it's like been around for a long time. There's just a new term that's been dubbed. And I think it was pushed out during the pandemic because during the pandemic, most people went and worked from home because for health and safety. And so it was easier to do that. And we saw it more. That, not to mention the weight of the pandemic, is just so immense that people had a lot on their mind. And it was easier to pull back in work, or maybe they had to. And the final thing I'll say, sorry, then I'm going to jump to you, is just on this. I think that it's important to know that there's an undertone of like engagement, unengagement. You're not going to be 100% all the time, and no one expects that, but it's like a time frame. So how long are you quiet quitting for example? And then how do you deal with it? So that was a
Yeah.
lot.
No, that was a great intro. And for those of you who aren't familiar with quiet quitting, it's obviously not actually quitting your job. It's exactly what Britt said. You're staying in your job, you're doing the bare ass minimum, you're not going above and beyond. Now, it depends what perspective we're looking at here. The employee or the employer perspective. Is it good? Is it bad? If you ask an employee, they're probably saying, hey, I only get paid to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Although we might have still engagement issues that kind of pervade the actual work and the outputs and whatnot. From the employer perspective, I'm looking at it quite negatively because I'm saying that individual and the individuals who give more, who produce more, who are more effective like than the average person, and they go above and beyond their job description, that's my leverage as an organization. Like,
But
that's
wouldn't you
essentially.
say quiet quitting isn't, I don't think, okay, maybe this is a good clarity. When I think about quiet quitting or like lack of engagement, it's not doing all the things required in the role, sorry, and not going above and beyond. It's actually not even doing the role at the bare minimum. It's like, but not terrible enough that it's easy to fire someone. So it's like
Mm,
you show up every day, you log in, you do a little bit, maybe you're on the verge of a performance improvement plan, but you're like just enough that it's like, oh, I don't know. And so you're not getting that extra for sure. But I don't even think, in my mind, I guess, you're not even doing what's expected of the
so
role.
you as the employer probably 100% say, like, that's the perspective, and that's probably a
Yeah,
perspective I would take as well. As the employee, particularly during a pandemic situation, I'm probably saying, "No, no, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be
I
doing every
see.
day. It's in my job description. I'm not going above and beyond. I don't get paid more to go above and beyond, and I've got all these other factors that need my attention right now. So I can't put in 10, 12-hour days or whatever the case may be to make it all work. I'm putting in exactly what I need to. And in my opinion, I'm doing everything I need to do. In the employer's perspective, that actually may not be the case. Is in that you're actually skirting even the bare minimum that needs to be produced. But the employer is going to expect a certain level of output, or people who are even just more efficient with their time, that they can manage more within a sustained period, rather than individuals who draw things out over, like, oh, I work 7.5 hours today, I've done all my job, boom, 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 boom. Someone who might have outputs of about 60% compared to someone else who's going to have full outputs and then go above and beyond during their working hours.
Well,
So,
and to
like,
me, this brings
perspectives are
back
key.
to lack of engagement. Like when you as a human are doing something, whether it's work, sports, an activity, a hobby, if you are engaged with what you're doing, if you're excited about it, if you are motivated to complete it, if you want to learn and grow, you are going to do everything and then some because you're in it. You're
Mhm,
loyal, you're, driven, all these good things. When you are not, and the pandemic heightened this because there was so much, like you said, like on
mhm.
our minds. There's so much weight. There was so many multitasking. People had kids at home. Like there was so many aspects of this that it was like, well, maybe I have to take a break from this work thing at the full capacity. And that's okay. And I think a lot of people did that, not even realizing that they were pulling away from what they liked. And maybe they didn't like it anymore. And they were just, there, but not.
So then let's talk about the shift from pandemic, um, from the power shift that was happening. Obviously, and I'm not saying that employees had the power. There was a lot that was going on that employees required that additional support, and there was way more flexibilities available because of all the
Yeah.
extenuating circumstances with the pandemic, and the needs, the family needs, and kids at home, and caring for people, and all those types of things that came with that period in time. Okay, now we're moving away from that. So, okay, maybe some disengagement during that period of time as a coping mechanism, as a defense mechanism, because you can't do everything at max capacity with all those other external factors hitting you in the face. Now we're post pandemic, right? So we're back in a fairly normal period. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that COVID-19 isn't a thing anymore, but we're essentially back to work. We've got vaccines, kids are back to school, people, like, the death rate is obviously decreasing, and obviously in countries that have westernized medicine that's able to cope with the pandemic. So now our expectations are changing, right? So we're seeing a power shift back to the employer, where we're saying, now we're going back to a normal state of being at this point. Quiet quitting, which might have been okay during the pandemic because of all those things, or tolerable, is it
I don't
not
think it was
tolerable
ever
anymore?
okay or tolerable. I think that this comes back to my first point of like a time frame. I think that you can't expect everyone to be 100% all the time. Like we're humans, we ebb and we flow, life changes, there's many aspects. So even during the pandemic or fast forward to now, it's a time frame. It's a conversation. It's an awareness both of, we talk about the individual. It's an awareness that like, wow, I really haven't been in this. I've been doing less than the bare minimum, and I probably need to pick it up and figure out why that is. Maybe I need a role switch. Maybe I need a new challenge. Maybe, there's a million things. So how do I want to re-engage? And it's been 2 months, and now I got to redo it. A lot of times that self-awareness is hard to come by. And so I would say from the employer, the lead, the manager, the mentor, it's to say, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been showing up. You haven't been as motivated. You're not doing the roles and expectations of what we thought it would be. And so, like, I know you had a lot going on. Maybe it was this example, or your parents are sick, or whatever. And this happens even post pandemic. Life happens.
Mhm.
But it's like, we have a job to do. Once again, bringing it back to the company. It's like we're all here for a reason. There's a transaction. We really care about you, but we need you to have an impact. And
Mhm.
so We got to get you back in. What is it that you're lacking? And so it's the re-engagement that gets someone out of it. And ultimately, if you can't, both individual or employer lens, it's like you got to cut ties. We'll get into that later, but let's talk about re-engagement. How do you get people out of that cycle of quietly quitting, not maybe realizing they're doing it?
Well, the self-awareness is key and the conversations are key, right? So I think you and I are going to come at this from very different perspectives, being private and public, and the ability to fire and do all those things in the private sector versus being able to do that in the public sector, and the um, types of expectations that are there as well in the federal government on how we support employees. And I'm not saying that this isn't the case at Shopify or in the private sector. You just have a lot more leeway to be very, very black and white about things,
I would say the
possibly.
opposite. We're way more nuanced. It's probably more, well, anyways, I digress. I disagree though.
So, okay, so we might have some different perspectives on that. So, what happens though, and I think yeah, we need to get back to how do you re-engage individuals, but what is the core problem for quiet quitting? So, lack of engagement, whether it's because of extenuating factors, and that might bleed into just no longer being engaged at all, or those individuals who were not engaged, for example, during a pandemic situation, might re-engage after some of the heaviness, the weight of those environmental factors have relief. So we might have those situations, which are great. And that probably alludes to someone's character and someone's dedication to their job, and that they had to not be 100% all in at this point in time because of this, but now we've picked it back up. Then you've got the folks who just, maybe have always been low performers, or have hit kind of a rut and that role is no longer for them, and then we have to deal with that situation, whether you should be staying here or whether you should be going elsewhere, or re-envisioning the role altogether.
Yeah,
um
I think no matter what organization you're in, private or public, when I think about quiet quitting, I think that the first step you do, let's just take the manager, the lead's perspective. If you notice that someone on your team is pulling away, is showing up every day, but not showing up to their full potential, um, avoiding things, avoiding work, whatever. I think the first thing, have a conversation. Like, call out the elephant in a room. Whether you're in the government or the private sector, that is the responsibility of a lead, is to say, hey, I see you. It's not getting unnoticed. And there's been a drastic change from point A to point B. Why? Get curious. And I think, the individual will probably, hopefully, explain what it is. Whether it's, in today's time, it could be a multitude of things. Life happens. It could be a sick family member. It could just be they're not interested. But it's that, to start that discussion and say what really matters to you and how are we going to get back there, and to say it's not okay. I think the difference of the private versus public is, in the private, you can have statements like, this is not okay. And if this continues, we'll be going into a performance plan and it could lead to an exit because we need you up to this potential. In the
mhm.
government, public, I feel like that's a fake threat because you're
No, yeah.
probably not going to fire them. And so I think that the actions and tactics where you go from here are going to be different. But that conversation, that reality check, that support to get them back on track, to have a conversation, it's the same wherever you are.
So what about in situations where there's been significant job creep, that the roles and responsibilities have increased significantly from the initial job description,
Give me
for
an example, like
example?
a real example.
So, okay, so I have 5 files typically, and to just go, like, really, really basic with this, and over the last 3 years, now I've been increasing to 9 files, but my job description says 5 files, but I manage 9, and now I have X amount client versus previously. Do I just accept as the employee that that's just now what the role is? Or is it my employer's responsibility to look at that job creep and to say, maybe I need to redefine like the core job tasks and relook at, like, does that result in a lack of engagement, a lack of motivation, because the individual said, hey, you hired me based on these premises. And I know sometimes we have job descriptions that are open to interpretation, that there can be an increase and whatnot. But if it's fairly clearly defined, why over the last 3 years has it doubled or has it,
Yeah.
increased by 40%? And is it my right to say, well, I'm going to stick to my job description? And I get there's going to be perceptions around that and someone's dedication to their role and whatnot. But as the employer, do I have the responsibility to say, I need to relook at your core job
100% you do.
responsibilities
100%.
and
I
have
think
that discussion?
yeah, I think you very much do. I also think it's up to the lead along the way to have the conversation and say, it's not like one day it's 5, the next day it's 10 and like we never talked about it. Like that would be weird to me if that is the scenario. I think the lead is failing if that's the case. I would think a more realistic situation is like you go maybe from 5 to 6 to 7 and each time
Right.
the lead's like, "Hey, Chels, can you handle an extra file?" And it's like, "Yeah, I can't wait. Give me more." Hopefully you're getting recognized based on
Well,
that
there's
extra contribution through compensation, through titles, through extra opportunities,
awards, whatever.
right? And like that should be happening. If at some point, so let's say we play out that. So you're getting recognized, you've had conversations, then all of a sudden you're like, I'm exhausted, life is too much. I want to go back to 5 because the one job description I saw 2 years ago said that I only have to manage 5.
Mhm.
Well, to me, that's bullshit. Like, that's a pullback. But I do think that it is the organization's responsibility to update those files, like to say,
Yeah.
okay, your role has changed. And each time I would give recognition, whether that be comp, opportunities, titles, I would
Mhm.
say, this is a representation of your expanding role. And here's what you're doing that we like. It's a feedback loop. And
So, like,
so,
you
yeah,
can think of it in terms of like hiring too. Say there were 4 persons on a team, and that was always the structure. Without even looking at like a restructuring or a reorganization of files and a creation of efficiencies and like leaning various processes, now there's people on the team or there's 2 people on the team, and the expectation as those who are remaining on the team are going to pick up on all of those files. Are they quietly quitting if they're like,
what would quietly
"Wah,
quitting in that example look like though? Like, is it just letting
I'm
things
do-"
drop?
like, well, I don't know about letting things drop, but now we're dividing a workload of 4 people amongst 2 or 3 people without actually having reduced or eliminated some of the workload or creating efficiencies in the workload, and saying, now what was done by this amount of people is done by this amount of people, and that's your job. Go ahead and do it. How does that work for the employee to sit back and say, yeah, I can't go at 150% all the time just
That's something
because you're
completely
not willing to
different.
hire.
That's something completely different though than quiet quitting.
But
Like, I
it
think in
could
that
be very
scenario
common. That's
what,
very
sorry?
common. That can be super common, that hiring lags so much, or that they
I
decide not
totally
the
agree.
budget.
I think your example is valid. I think that that happens a lot. I think that's just a representation of, like, real life and
Mhm,
work evolving and changing, and I think the individual can raise their hand and say, I didn't sign up to do 2 roles with
mhm,
1 person or 1 salary, which is fair, but I think what I'm saying is, like, quiet quitting is something very different than that. I'm trying to relate, like, how does quiet quitting show up? So maybe their expectations have ballooned out and it's not a fair expectation, and so
mhm.
then they pull back and go silent. I would assume in that situation, though, that if you go from run 1 role to expecting 2 roles in 1 person, if you start pulling back and quiet, you're gonna get noticed right away. You're gonna have a
Right.
conversation right away because they're already slim on their, support of humans. So I think you would notice and have a conversation with it. I think it's
So
way easier to quiet quit when there's so many people doing the same roles that there's an abundance. Like I know
you
people,
can, like, just shrink in the background
yeah,
or
that
something
just
like
like
that,
you're like, well, I don't have to show up because they're not gonna notice. I think
but
quiet quitting happens the
more
most when
noticeable.
there's no visibility. So meaning there's too many people doing one role, or people are, let's say this is the big scary thing about working from home, is that people can not show up. I think that's bullshit because I think if you have the right expectations and like high expectations from someone, they're going to show up no matter where they are. They're adults. You don't need to babysit them. But I
Mhm.
think that if you are a shitty manager or your organization doesn't have proper expectations and feedback loops on impact, then of course people can hide in the smoke of it all. Like that is where quiet quitting happens. It's up to
So
you to
the
figure it out.
Yeah, the funny thing is that you mentioned the employees, like, you feel like you might be safe in numbers. Like that's your perspective, is that I can like pull back. There's a couple other people doing stuff, like let me shrink back in this. Me as the employer, I think the exact opposite, because I'm measuring folks obviously against their job description, but you're always comparing. Sally and Joe give me 120% all the time. So and so gives me, she gives me what her job is and whatever the case may be. And then you got someone who's like well below like the norm and average. For me, that stands out even more. And for me, I think it's that conversation, like you said, that needs to happen. Between the employees, why is this happening on your end? Like, what's contributing to this? Below
Yeah.
par contributions, like less impact. And me as an employer, what can I do to support you? Is this still the role for you? Like, we need to bring you back up so that you feel like you're on level with others as well. Because sometimes it's a self confidence thing, and sometimes they need more training or need more support in order to come up to that. Or maybe it's like it's a completely new role, and maybe it's just not for you here anymore
Yeah.
for this
I
specific
think
job.
I think what you just said about there's more visibility when you can look at larger numbers because you can compare. I think that could be true if it's a good manager. I think it's not true if they are not an
If you're not in tune,
experienced lead who could, well, also, let's just be very blunt. My big aha right now in my head is quiet quitting is one thing of the individual, but when they like blame the individuals, it's bullshit because if you have good managers, they will become aware and call you out on it. And so like the hardest thing to do as managers, which I coached leads
addressing it.
all the time on it, is like have the conversation. For whatever reason, why it's not whatever reason, it's the reality that we hate conflict. Usually humans do not like to engage
Right.
in conflict and have to address things. And it wraps up in their head that it's like, okay, so Katie over here, I realized on the whole team, she's the lowest performer. She's really pulled back. She's not even in the chat anymore. I don't know where she is half the day. She's
Yeah.
doing some projects, but not fully contributing. And then it's like, okay, so Chelsea, now as a lead, go have a conversation. You probably should have
Right.
had one 2 months ago. And the
Oh
lead's
yeah.
like, well, oh, I mean, I know I need to address it, but I got so many things on my plate and I got to do this. And like, I'm going to just actually get Brittany over here to do more. And so that will work. I'll just get her to pick it up.
Yeah.
That's the problem with it
Wrong.
all. It's like, no,
Wrong.
slow down,
Oh,
stop, have the conversation.
this is a collaboration amongst that employee and the leadership. And I've been dealing with a situation like this over the last several months. And it's become very clear to me it's not one sided, it never is one sided. Individuals, so funny enough, and like I've talked about before, like with entitlement and other things, you can be the worst. Like you can be a crappy employee, you can be quietly quitting, you can be doing all those things. And then you could move to a team under completely different leadership and doing different things, and you could be the star employee. And I'm not saying that's my particular experience, but I will say that I've been in roles previously where I was disengaged. Yeah, the work environment may have been a bit toxic. I was no longer relating to my files. I don't feel like I was being recognized for my contribution. I don't feel like I was ever being able to reach for my full potential. And then I moved to another team, and it completely changed for me. And maybe it's because I had the support. Maybe it's because I had actual, real, true feedback from my leadership, and I was more
It's all
aligned
these
with what I
things.
was doing. Like it can happen, like, right? So
Well,
you have to say, like, where's my part in this?
so agreed. So you just talked about, and I want to repeat this, but it's like how to re engage. But before we get into those specifics, I want to say there's always essentially three sides to it. There's like you as the individual, there's the leads, and then there's like the truth, which is the third lens on it, because we're all biased and we're seeing only
Was
one
that
side
like
of our story.
everybody else? Or is
Yeah.
it just, yeah. So like it's like kind of in betweenies.
Well, there's just a yeah, there's three different lenses on it, but I think that the responsibility this is why there is a manager and an individual contributor. The manager is accountable to set
Mhm.
up the situation. And if like yes, we drive our own careers as individuals, we push it, and I hope there's self-awareness and I hope you ask and realize when things are challenging and you need to reset. But there's only so much you can do in an organization. You can't just raise your hand and say, I've been quietly quitting for 3 months. I'm not
Yeah,
engaged. Put me in a new role. I swear it will help. It's like, well, no, that's not going to happen. You have to talk to your lead, and your lead has to actually help set that up. But
right.
going back to what you said, which I think is from your personal example, but like the lead has control to be able to do this. So if you have someone on your team that is not engaged, quietly quitting, whatever you want to call that, it's like, how do you reset it up? Well, there's some simple, tangible things. One, it's like have a conversation and
Mhm,
make sure the individual feels seen.
mhm,
Two, I think you said feedback. It's like you want to know that you are getting recognized for the work you are doing and
mhm.
getting criticism for the gaps that you're not. You want to feel seen and cared about.
You can't
Engagement is
skirt
huge
you
about
can't
what?
skirt that. So I was just gonna say you can't skirt that. It's not just about what you're doing well, it's also about what you're not doing or not doing well. The people have to hear that, and you
Yep,
have to be strong enough to give them that feedback.
100%. I think the next one is you have to feel like you have the resources to do your job. Lack of
Mhm.
engagement occurs when you, in some scenarios, when you are set up to do a role, but you don't feel like you can do it, whether it's like you don't have the pencils to do it, or else you actually don't have the skills or
Training?
tools.
Yeah.
Like that will create someone to pull back and away because they don't feel prepared or supported. And so I think it's like, ask, do you have the resources? Are you set up to do the job that you'd like to do? Another one is like friendships and community. And I guess this one's really highlighted in the pandemic because everyone went home, everyone pulled back, and our tools weren't set up to replicate the actual in-person environment that we were
Right.
all used to. It took time to catch up. And so we lost a lot of that community, of that peer base, of that care. And that led to a lot of lack of engagement
Mhm.
because you were like, no one's even really going to care if I don't show up. And
No
it's like,
one's gonna see it.
no, they
Yeah.
will. So I think those are really important. There was another one I feel like you said that really highlights the lack of engagement and what you can change. Oh, just like
Mm.
challenging new problem. Like you said, a new team or a new opportunity is huge to bring people back in. But I will caveat that with if they're showing that no matter like there has to be attributes or promises that a new team will actually result in someone coming back to engagement and
Right.
impact. Like don't just take someone off your team and be like, okay, now Brittany, you're dealing with this person because I don't want to and I can't deal with it. It's going to be great. Like that doesn't always result.
No. You're not shoving it off on someone else. You need to, like you said, you need to know when an exit is key, whether it's a permanent exit or a temporary kind of revivement of that engagement possibly. But you do need to know in terms of like exit, and I mean like firing in your case, we're not coming back from this. Like we've tried multiple ways to re-engage you. I'm seeing the effort on the employer's part, but not seeing the effort coming back on the employee's part.
Yeah.
That's it. Like we've done all the things that we needed to do to try to create that environment and try to support individuals to have that opportunity to come back. And sometimes they're not going to. And you need to absolutely be able to pull the trigger on it's not going to work out.
Yeah. And I think for that, it's like set some time periods, have a conversation and be aware of it and see if things change. And then ultimately, after that work is being done. And one thing we always used to say is there should be no surprises. Some
Mhm.
people are like really unaware and there will be clashes, but overall speaking, outliers aside, there shouldn't
Right.
be any surprises for this person if you do say you're gone. So, like, number one, do that. Number two, we would ask leads essentially, do you see potential in this person re-engaging and having an impact? And if they were like, hell no, and here's why, and then we were like, okay, well, you have to have some more
Listen.
hardcore conversations, and that does sound like an exit. Whereas if it's the opposite, and it's like they've just been really off for the past month, and I don't get it, and I want it's like, no, lean in harder then. Let's
Yeah,
work
figure
on
it
it.
out.
But ultimately, sometimes it just isn't a fit, and you gotta push the red button and say goodbye.
Yeah, you can't expect that everything is gonna turn out positive and cheery and whatever Disney movie. I think that your point about there shouldn't be surprises is absolutely key, private, public. Like, for
Anywhere.
example, it cracks me up a little bit, and my space right now and what I work in my files is in performance management. Performance management happens all year round, and we work through fiscal years, for example. So performance management isn't just a thing in February and March when we're doing end of year performance assessments. Performance management happens throughout various conversations from the beginning to the middle to the end of the year. So that's not only setting out clear objectives, priorities, and performance indicators, it's everyone understanding them, doing check ins throughout the year, confirming if we're on track at the mid year, and then reviewing performance towards the end of the year. The worst thing you absolutely want to hear is someone who maybe got a poor performance assessment and goes, "This is so out of left field for me. Like everything was fine throughout the year and it said I was on track at mid-year to meet expectations and then all of a sudden it's not." And this is like a huge bone of contention for me when managers aren't having performance feedback discussions throughout the year
Aren't
going,
having real conversations because they
there's
don't wanna
no
deal with it.
there's no real substance, and then it comes up as a massive surprise and they go, "Oh my gosh." And like you've done something wrong. You've done something seriously wrong at this point because you've not actually been providing feedback throughout the year. And also the problem is if they say, "Well, over the last 2 months they've been doing really really poorly." Well, your assessment is based on the entire year, and that's a recency bias. So that's
Yeah.
actually wrong in performance management. You're assessing based on the entire year. Um, but it brings me back to a situation of my own over the last couple of months where I had a discussion with someone about how a role wasn't going to continue as, may have been a case. And I said, "Hey, well, it's not going to continue for X, Y, and Z reasons over the past, several while. We're not meeting the particular expectations. This is what the organization needs from this particular role." And that individual said to me, "I'm actually not surprised given, how things have
Yeah.
been going over the last little while." So that is key to me that I've been giving feedback throughout the process, going like this was good or this was not good. This needs improvement. Haven't seen the improvement. We're continuing to make the same mistakes over and over. I need someone who's going to level up. So when someone tells me they're not surprised, I'm like, okay, so I've at
I
least
did
been
my
giving that
job.
continuous feedback
Yeah.
and you haven't managed to level up. So I am, within my purview at this point to say, I'm making an organizational decision. And we
Yeah.
all need to get on board with it's what's best for the organization. But it is how I support you now. It is
Yeah,
how I
well, and I
support
think
you.
that that's just to bring it back to quiet quitting because 'cause we're getting so deep into performance management. I
Me
think that
too.
the quiet quitting relevant to this is it's up to you to have conversations all the way through of like you're not engaged, you're not doing meeting your expectations. So it really is a performance conversation. And at a certain point, like that's when the shouldn't be a surprise of whatever decision you make,
Mhm.
wherever you end up in the end. And it's the manager's responsibility to do that. We I think let managers off the hook a lot and it's bullshit. It's like, no, be better, people lead and set them up for success. And
And
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say it brings us back to a episode that we've recorded before about interviews and talking about being comfortable or being at ease in uncomfortable situations. This is the exact thing I was talking about in that I want to see how someone reacts in an interview, deals with an uncomfortable situation or responds to situational questions or behavioral questions about things they've done in the past because I want to know how they're going to deal with these types of uncomfortable
It's a
situations because
predictor for
there's
sure.
nothing more uncomfortable than telling someone you've checked out or like you're not doing this and you're not doing that. It's hard. It's sometimes an emotional discussion for me as a female. I often cannot separate, emotions as well as, and maybe I'm stereotyping again, as maybe our male counterparts where it's a bit more cut and dry. I'm reacting to a lot of what's going on around me and the situation that's impacting that person, trying to like minimize that impact, but it's still easy enough to get into it and go like, this is awkward.
Yeah, I think I don't know if that's a gender thing. In my opinion, it'd be more of like an experience level of being a lead. Like I think it gets more and more comfortable. I think when
Mhm.
you're a new lead, especially, and I'm not saying you now because I think you've surpassed this quite a bit, but when I know I was a new lead, I wanted everyone to like me. And
Yeah.
so like if it was someone that I cared about that was once amazing, that might be my friend that is now not engaged in quietly quitting, it was 10 times as hard to have that conversation because
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, I'll give them every benefit under the sun. I'm sure I know that their mom's sick or I know that they're dealing with this. So, like, I'll just let them lean back for a while. No. you have the conversation and say, "Hey, I noticed this. It's not okay. Tell me why and let me support you." And maybe you do get like some benefit of will lower your workload for a bit. But it's the conversation and the intentionality of it. And
Right.
it's the fact that the lead has to be able to have it. And that is hard. And so, like, it's not about being liked, it's about setting up the team in the right way. But I do think we have so many good tidbits here, which is maybe the ahas of quiet quitting. It's like, one, quiet quitting isn't just like this side pandemic of employees deciding that they don't want to show up and no one's working anymore. It's not all on the individuals. It is, I would say, 80% on the organization and the leads about having the right conversations around, saying, hey, this is happening. How are we going to get you re-engaged? It's about performance management. It's about leading a team, getting
Mhm.
them right back into it, and setting them up for success. And if that doesn't happen, it is about saying, okay, you're no longer a fit for this company because you aren't contributing. And so have expectations, communicate expectations, and hold people accountable to it.
And throwing in there listening to those folks and what they're telling you, because a lot of us have a tendency to just go, "This is happening, and, like, this is it, and we're gonna do X, Y, and Z." Take a moment to listen. Take a moment to understand what the core contributors are to that lack of engagement, that lack of motivation. And it might be something that's happening for that person in their own lives, personally, professionally. It could be something that they feel like is happening to them within the organization that they're unable to manage. And that's where we come into maybe some of that job creep or some of that kind of
Yeah.
work hustle that we all got really, really accustomed to. Maybe generally for everyone, but like really over the pandemic as well. The hustle that you always have to be on all the time. And for us in the public service, and for many, many other areas that are providing services or products or whatever, there's expectations that you will continue delivering at whatever costs. And sometimes we need to adjust those expectations a little bit because we can't work people to the bone and they can't keep up. So what is
There's a
happening there?
pendulum on both sides. I think maybe quiet quitting is on one side of the pendulum. The other side is, to your point, working 24/7, always being attached. Like, both of those are really, really unhealthy,
So
and
is
it's
it
about
quiet
creating an
quitting or is it
environment.
that? Yeah.
What, sorry?
So I'm like, is it quiet quitting or is it that? Like where exactly is it falling? And only by listening and having those
Yeah.
conversations are you actually going to be able to figure it out. But you can't just go in with your assumption right off the bat and expect that that's going to be validated because it could be something different.
No, I agree. I think there's things the individual controls and there's things that the lead controls and is accountable. And so it's a relationship like any other, but the lead is more responsible because that is why they're in the lead position to make the tough calls, to have the tough conversations, to listen, and to take action when necessary.
So,
Yeah.
like, don't be a bad lead, like, don't be a shitty lead, be a good lead and, like, listen and grow some balls, like, essentially, and, like, do what needs to be done to support the people, but to ensure that the organization is delivering on
Yep.
what it needs to, right?
With that, we
Anyways,
wrap for wine.
I think we've totally wrapped this, so let's grab a drink and then we'll, shoot the shit.
Okay, and we're back. You got your white, I got my white. Before I sip it, I'll show the bottle. Today, we are drinking Whitehaven. It is a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, personal fave. Love my New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. 2021 is when it was made. A lot of good tasting notes. I'm not going to get into all of that. What I will say is it's a Safeway purchase. And actually, we upped our game. So went in there and I said, here's some of the things I like. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he was in the wine aisle. And he's like, let me show you something new. Brought this one out. And
Stop,
I,
they have a connoisseur?
oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He knew everything. And then we bought he upsold us so well. We ended up with like red wine, white wine. They have these vodka fresca cans. We ended up with those. By then, he gave us 2 coupons for $10 off the red and the white. We were like best
What?
buddies. But I will say, I bought more than one bottle, and I do know it's really fucking good. So, cheers.
Cheers.
It's good. So, it's a dry, crisp, all my favorites. Um, it's very, like, typical of a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. I would give it an 8.5.
8.5. That's a nice high one for you.
I know. It's around 25 bucks US.
Can I ask a question because you say this really often? Is it pronounced Sauvignon Blanc or Sauvignon Blanc?
Ooh, tomato, tomato.
What's the well, I don't know about that. What's the spelling on it?
It's
Well,
Sauvignon. Sauvignon Blanc. I think it's Sauvignon.
so if it's a U, then yes, we're presumably it's a Sauvignon Blanc.
You know what? It's a Britneyism. It's a little slang. It's just what I do.
Because I've heard you say it so many times. She's like Sauvignon Blanc, and it's like such a like
I think it's a
English
little bit of
person way
slang.
to
You know,
say
when you
it.
go to the restaurant and you're like, what are you going to have? And you're like, I'll have a Sauv Blanc. Sauv Blanc. You know, like
Right.
just,
Maybe that's just a you thing. But anyways, that's fine. Like you just need to say it how you want to say it. Like
well, after you shame me for 5
I'm
minutes.
not
Cool.
shaming you, Brittany. I'm helping you. I'm giving you like constructive criticism so you don't sound like a doofus.
Well, it's real
JK.
good. Get your hands on a bottle. I will be drinking more of it. Um, Whitehaven. It's great. Now I'm
Whitehaven.
questioning if I'm even saying Whitehaven right. I'm like,
Well, how is it spelled?
oh, shut up. It's right.
I'm joking. You know what I was going to say about like what's going on here? The weather in Ottawa is
Yeah.
so bad, and it's been so bad since I returned home from my trips. Like, and Gary keeps mentioning to me like you brought the crappy weather back, which is like
Well,
so frustrating because it was so good when I was in California and AZ, and now it's like horrendous, and it's like
yeah,
no
wasn't
end
it
in
like
sight.
30 degrees back home when, like in Ottawa
Was
when you were
stunning for
here?
like several days in a row. Beautiful. And it's been nonstop rain and crap since I got
Oh,
back. Like this week too is meant to be nonstop rain and crap.
that sucks. It's really sunny here. Yesterday we golfed in 33 degrees but it's like a dry 33, so it's not as humid and gross, but it was still spicy hot. Yeah, we're straight heat over here in AZ. Straight heat. I'm hoping that Ottawa gets warm. Maybe I'll bring the heat back.
Well, you're still not coming back for what, like a month. So
No, no,
obviously
no. I
you're
come back for 36 hours.
yeah. Like it's gonna matter what the weather is when you come back for 36 hours. You'll literally be sleeping, visiting with your family for 4 or 5 hours, and then you'll be out on a
We're
jet
actually
plane.
celebrating my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, which is special. So, yeah. Can you
Oh,
imagine?
when you get back.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we go on our trip. We're doing south of France and Scotland and stuff. Then we'll be back for the whole summer. Cannot wait.
Maybe you can go and visit, or no, you know what you can do? Ask them how to pronounce the Sauvignon Blanc or if it's Sauvignon Blanc. I
Okay, I'll
want you to
ask.
ask that when you're in France. See
Oh,
what they say.
no, they're gonna just look at me and like straight up laugh in my
Just
face.
destroy you. Just like
I'll start it
destroy.
with, so you know the saying, tomato, tomato. Well,
Yeah, she's
curious
like tomato,
about.
tomato, and they're like, no, not really. Like,
They just kicked me out of their wine bar. Not
yeah,
okay.
laughing stock. She's a laughing stock. They'll be like silly American, like like as usual.
I know. I'm like, I'm Canadian.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
So good.
Well, that's good. I'm excited for you and your trips. I don't know if I'll even be able to see you when you come back because you're having such a tight return. So I expect
Yeah, I
it'll
don't
just be
know. I
Sam
mean,
Jam.
I don't even know. I'll be like trying to get onto the time zone again and then switch. So who knows? I'll be up late if you want to
Oh
come
my God.
visit
Yeah,
for a
you're
late
going to have
night.
a wicked time zone difference because you're going to do 3 hours from AZ and then you're going to go 5 hours ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride. Lots of
Yeah,
melatonin.
your integration going to Europe is going to be rough, but after you get over a couple of days, you'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope.
Well, I
Well,
think we're
I
good
hope you
then.
get warm weather. I hope that things turn around. If not, enjoy your wine and stay inside.
I mean, yeah, brutal. I will do all those things, and I always enjoy my wine. So thank
Okay,
you.
well, cheers.
Cheers to you. And
Cheers.
The Sauv Blanc.
Even that I say wrong. Bye.